Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second day of Level Up. It's a week of practical conversations designed to help you build skills, confidence, and perspective for the world of work as it continues to change and evolve around us. It's great to have you here, and my name is Wendy Palmer. I'm the founder of Lifelong Learning Practice, and I work in the areas of lifelong learning, skills literacy, digital credentials, and navigating the intersection between education and employment. And I'm delighted to be here today. So in today's session, we're joined by Nicole Daftery, Mel Bridge and Jane Howley, and we're going to explore how to stay competitive in a changing world of work, looking at how we use things like curiosity, kindness, creativity to drive growth, and how we recognise our own transferable skills and adapt them throughout your career, especially as industries and roles evolve. And we'll also be looking at how we can actually make intentional career moves beyond the traditional career ladder. We're going to have some time for questions at the end, and so please submit them through the QA window. And I'd now like to introduce the panel and ask them to introduce themselves. And so I'll start with Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I studied Bachelor of Commerce at Deakin with triple major. Just didn't know what to do, so I did everything. And hopefully something will work out in the future. Since then, I've worked in multinational companies in accounting and finance, as a CFO, as a financial controller, as a finance manager, moved into business analytics. Maybe then one point in time had midlife crisis or thought, I'm not doing a PowerPoint presentation for others. So I decided on my own journey and started a sexual health and wellness brand. Yes, from accounting to selling condoms. We sell in Coles and Chemist Warehouse now in Australia and New Zealand. And we'll see how the next pivot goes.
Wonderful. Thank you. And that's a great example of a pivot in a career. And so, Mel.
Hi, my name's Mel Bridge. I did a Bachelor of Commerce and a double major in HR and Management many years ago at Deakin. I have had a career in HR, but I have done a couple of pivots. I've moved into recruitment, working with recruitment agencies. Then I've come back into corporate HR. I've then run my own business and developed software in career development space. And I now run a business called AI Talent on Demand, where I specialise in AI recruitment.
Fantastic. And again, a recurring theme, a number of changes and pivots. So I think it's going to be great to explore those. But Jane.
Hi, thank you. So my name's Jane Howley. I started off my career I did an arts degree to start with, and then did work in PR, communications, media, did a master's with Deakin in professional communications, and did a lot of public health communications and government. And then a few years ago, I pivoted into tech, and I'm now the AI strategy and assurance lead for Department of Government Services. So
Wonderful. Lovely to have you all here. And I'd like to start, I think the theme for today is the idea of how do you become your own career architect and make those intentional decisions. So one of the things I'd like to ask is, we used to talk about the career ladder. Does that still mean anything? Is it still relevant? What does that look like today? So I think I'll start with you, Jane.
I think when you talk about the career ladder, probably hasn't reflected my journey. It's certainly it's not that linear kind of direction of I start here and I'm going to end up there. I think I've probably been quite opportunistic on the way through, like really good opportunities, found things that interested me along the way. I really didn't think I would end up in tech. Probably that's partly due to my generation and my gender as well, that it wasn't something that when I said I was interested in computers when I was, 19, people said, oh, you can do data entry then. So I've really loved that it has changed so much on the way through. And there's probably a few things that have contributed to that, which we can go into, but it's that bit around how do you bring curiosity and the kindness that you talked about? What's the power of that and how you can use that to do those kind of pivots that you want to do?
Lovely. Thank you.
I think being a recruiter, I see that most people these days, the career ladder doesn't exist. That really, for their career to move, they take that next job. So they learn some skills in one job, in a profession, and then they come to me and say, I'm ready for a change or a new role, or to actually then take the next step. So I
Yeah.
think the career ladder is not necessarily in one organisation, but it's moving out to take the next step.
I think that's a very good point. I remember my father spent his entire life in the one organisation,
Mm,
moving up that career ladder, and it just doesn't happen anymore.
no.
Nicole?
I think so. Like for me, the career ladder is like old fashioned. Earlier it was you get a degree, you work for 40 years, and then after 40 years, you get a handshake and a mug saying thank you for your services. So nowadays, it's with such a fast moving space, careers are very chaotic. One end, people are doing accounting and finance, and the other end, they're selling condoms. But it's like I think a career now is like a Google map. You take 7 different turns and it keeps on recalculating again. So it's no longer the title-based careers, it's more skill-based. And what
Mm,
skills you bring to the table, that's what matters now. And it's just more of people are trying to reinvent themselves now quite often than earlier. It was like, after 5, 10 years or 15 years, you work in a company and say, okay, now I want to change. But now it's like, 2 years, I want to change. Or maybe people update their resume the first day at the new
yeah.
workplace.
Mm.
So building on that point, I like that phrase, today's career journeys are a lot more chaotic. And then I think you said they were more skills-based. If you were speaking to a graduate, what advice would you give them about understanding their skills?
So I think the skills nowadays is it's not no longer you're a retail marketer or office assistant or thing. It's like a fun way of saying I love walking down the beach. So mostly now the skills which you have is like resilience, communication,
Mm,
which you bring to the table. What problems are you solving? What do you bring to the table is the main thing. And mostly it's like a adult Mario Kart game. You never go straight line.
Yeah.
You're always going
Especially
ups
not
and
if I'm
downs.
driving it.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Would you like to build on that?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I think I totally agree with everything you've said there. I think the other thing that I wish I'd known when I was, 20 or at uni was that where you get your skills doesn't have to be in the workplace as well. So one of the things that's been incredibly powerful for me is being able to contribute back to my community in various different ways. So whether you are sitting on your school board or your kids' school board when they're young, or whether you're helping at the local community house, or your ability to pick up skills and capabilities can come from anywhere, not just that. And then how do you talk about that when you go to work? So nowadays I get the privilege of sitting on the hiring manager side as well. So people will, you'll ask about a skill and they go, well, I got that, but I did that 20 years ago. I don't really mind when you did it. I just need to know that you can do it. So I don't mind that you did it at uni. One of my biggest learning curves was being a concert manager for clubs and societies and trying to wrangle 200 choristers. You learn a lot. Um, but it taught me a huge amount of skills in project management and logistics and, those kind of capabilities that I then was able to bring back into my workplace. So when I'm sitting in those interviews, I get really excited when people talk about stuff that they've done throughout their life. I don't care when. I just need to know that you're capable of doing the job.
And it's an interesting point because I remember we used to encourage people to write their hobbies down, but I think you're going a little bit beyond that and sort of talking about lived experience.
It is
Yeah.
that. I had a family friend who ended up at a very senior role where she was in the room in the UN, and she always joked that the most she learned about politics, small p politics, was in the local rural school when she sat on there as the school council member. She said, that's where I learnt all of my politics.
Well, they can be ruthless.
Absolutely. So I think, that's the thing I probably wish I'd known when I was younger, that these things are really valuable. So not only do I get to do good things in the community and give back, but I can then, use that. Like, that's part of me. That's part of who I am and the skills that I bring to the table, as you were saying.
Yeah. Mel, what's your take on that idea of sort of lived experience, and how do you bring that in?
I think soft skills, I think the universities have been talking about them for many years, but I don't know whether students have really embraced how important they are. With AI now, a lot of technical skills, AI will outdo you. So it's going to be those interpersonal skills, those soft skills that you bring, that you learn through part-time work, through clubs, through understanding and working with people, challenges, building some resilience. Those skills are going to be, I believe, really important, because pivoting your career, often at the moment it's forced career. Your roles are made redundant now, quite common. If you're not in a restructure, I think I've been in 5 restructures in my career, and therefore you need to understand how to pivot and leverage some of those soft skills that you've learnt in that business to pick up your next role.
Yeah,
yeah, and that's a good point. Sometimes it's intentional.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's forced.
Yeah.
But just building a little bit on that, what advice would you give someone, especially around? I mean, you touched on AI, especially around when do you reskill deeply, or when do you just need a light little bit of upskilling? How do you sort of make that decision as to what you need to move or what you need to pivot?
Well, at the moment, having the capacity and pivoting takes effort. And so if we talk about just one soft skill that I think we were talking about earlier, sometimes to pivot to a different profession takes a lot of hard work and effort, and sometimes it may be a challenge. And so, it's pivoting takes effort and time. And I think that's the thing that if I could give a lesson learned to students, that would be one thing if they're doing a career pivot with skills.
Yeah, so it's I think the internet makes it look so easy, but it's actually
Yes.
often there needs to be hard work and planning
It
behind
is
it.
hard work. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's some really interesting research around people that naturally get value out of AI as well. So I find it fascinating that the stuff they're talking about is not the deep technical skills. It's actually around those soft skills as well. So there's one piece that I read was around collaboration. So people who naturally collaborate well are actually getting good value out of AI, or how to use it as well. So I find that quite fascinating, that I think our soft skills are going to become, as you were saying, more important.
So I was going to add on to that. So from what I gather from what you did is you went from a fairly traditional career into very much an entrepreneurial mode. What skills did you take with you, and what did you have to learn once you sort of made that shift?
Nowadays, for example, I'll just come back to AI. You are using it, or is it studying you, or is it just information purpose? Like, a lot of people use AI to 10x their productivity, and some of them basically change their whole AI thing and do their job in 14 seconds or 15 seconds. But what skills I brought was basically resilience, communication. Like, if I have a worker who is upset, I can't have them use AI and say, sort it out. But I got to be there. The human connection is there. My experience in business development, my accounting and finance, the numbers, which all those skills I took with me, which really helped me in my initial startup phase. When when the funds are low, how do you manage each of your arm? But when you're starting your own business, everything's yours. Cash flow is your problem. Logistics is your problem. Hiring is your problem. So, but the skills which really work well with me is that human connection, the human touch, the resilience, the communication.
Yeah. I think that's lovely. I mean, they talk a lot about the concept of AI. We still need human in the loop.
Indeed.
Otherwise, and especially that point about, you can't You can't ask an upset employee. You can't pass them off to an AI chatbot.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
As much as we'd like to.
so, so when we're looking at career change, because I think in this day and age, we talk about that something like 30% of jobs that are here now are going to be gone in 5 years.
Yeah.
What what advice would you give someone to say, how do I start planning for that? So I have a job now. It's going to last for a few years, but how do I start future proofing or planning for the next step so that when it gets there, I'm actually ready?
I think that bit, like I was talked about the power
Yeah.
of curiosity.
Mm.
So, finding things that interest you, finding ways to continue learning, like to do continuous learning throughout your life, um, is always going to help you be more resilient, and be ready and how, learning how to adapt and adopt to change, because that's going to be one of the biggest things. Change is inevitable, whatever that looks like. It's really hard for us to predict what roles are going to look like. We're certainly, as you were saying earlier, we're seeing some of the impacts of AI already flowing through the jobs that are in the market. But sometimes it'll be, sometimes that's a continuous thing. Sometimes that's a peak and a trough. It's going to be really hard for us to predict what individual roles or types of areas are going to look like. So if you have that curiosity and that continuous learning and are approaching that kind of thing in life rather than, so it's the growth mindset really, that's always going to be helpful.
Yes, I like that,
Yes.
the idea of a growth mindset. And I think you also made a comment there about continuing to learn.
Yeah.
We hear a lot of it today. Lifelong learning is sort of becoming a buzzword,
Yep.
and it's that idea of you don't learn then work. You learn, work, learn, work, learn, work.
And there's so many
Yeah.
opportunities for us to do that now. I mean, I often say to people, just find the nerdiest thing that you can deal with. If you want to learn about AI, you don't have to be going and learning from the, super nerdy whatever. Find the techiest thing that you can deal with that still interests you, and be listening to that daily, weekly, monthly, whatever. Just continuously learning.
I think you got to curiosity is number one. I think so, and adapt or die. You got to adapt to the current situation. It's basically skill sets. You got to adapt to evolving. Careers are nowadays are really reinventing yourself,
Mhm.
and you got to see what's happening in the marketplace and what skills are missing. I remember maybe 30, 50 years back or something. The only way you could educate yourself is go to the library and read up books,
Yeah.
and that's
Look at
it.
it now.
Yeah.
The iPhone.
But now the technology is so advanced, and you have so many other mediums the way you can educate yourself, not going to a degree, or not going to universities, online.
Mhm.
And so why don't people who are newly graduates can adapt to that and upskill themselves, keep on honing their skill sets, so that, and you never start with zero. You have your skills, you have your teamwork, your communication skills and interpersonal skills, but the other skill sets, which is not soft skills, we
Yeah.
need to
And things are
basically,
changing
yes.
as well. You might be managing AI and robots and other things in the future. You may not be managing people. So
Yep.
being comfortable in being uncomfortable, I think, is
Mhm.
going to be a trend that I think you're going to have to reinvent yourself constantly, and that could be annually. But I think that probably is going to be the future. But it's also exciting because we don't actually know the jobs. I don't think the jobs have been invented yet that people will be doing. I don't think my 11-year-old son, if I gave him career advice today, would probably be relevant by the time he's 18. So I think that's the thing we have to be comfortable about, change and rapid change.
So as I've been listening to you talk, I think one theme is coming through, which is that idea of the curiosity, the learning, the constant doing that. But how then does somebody take that and translate that into, like, traditionally we've been on our resumes, we've been told to include our job roles, what we did, we include our education.
Yeah.
So how do people actually describe that? It feels a bit funny going, well, I've done all these things. Oh, but I also volunteered at Scouts, or I did this.
Oh,
How would you encourage people to tell the story of what they're capable of?
you're dealing with all this
Well,
all
I
the
mean, I think
time. So,
storytelling about yourself is going to be really important in the future. I don't even know whether in 10 years we'll even have resumes because AI may be looking at you and wanting to know you, and you will be giving a video as to yourself and your history and who you are and your attributes. So being able to be comfortable about talking about yourself and where you've come from and how you've ended up where you are today may be the future of a resume. It may not be a traditional resume as such. I think that's another change happening overseas
Yeah.
at the moment.
I think so. Like when I'm looking at resumes, I'm not looking at titles. I don't care what titles you have. Once upon a time, I had a title Senior Global Commercial Analyst. I don't know what that meant, but the only thing I was doing
Sounded
was
fancy.
business analytics. So I want to know, what have you done? What difference have you made, in your company?
Yeah.
What skills do you bring to the table for my company? And what problems are you solving? What have you solved? Give me some more facts, and I think so. You're right. Like, it has to be a storytelling. You're
Yeah.
literally selling yourself,
Mhm.
and you need, it's a pretty harsh way of saying that you need a buyer to say, yeah, I love this. I want you on board. So
Yeah.
it will be all about skill sets, what you bring to the table, and what problem can you solve.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I do quite a bit of work sort of globally. And one of the things I find is that there are some countries and cultures that are very comfortable talking about themselves. I'm
Yeah.
thinking we all know
Yes.
Americans are very, we always talk about, Americans are
Yeah.
always happy to talk themselves up. But in Australia, we've sort of got a bit of, oh, you shouldn't be bragging, you shouldn't be that. So what advice would you give people to how to get comfortable telling their story without them feeling like they're being pushy or without, how do you get comfortable saying, this is what I can do?
yeah, I think it's that bit. Like, I have half an hour in an interview with you, like that, and having sat on the hiring manager's side, it taught me a lot, because you literally have to convince me in half an hour that
Yeah.
you are the person for the job. So it's not bragging, it's not anything. It is literally telling me the story and the narrative as to
Yeah.
why you are the person I should employ. Keeping in mind that I might have 9 of those interviews in one day. So don't waffle. Don't give it to me on a plate. I did say to someone once, could you just hit me over the head with it? Like, tell me why I should be employing you. And they went, oh, I'd never thought of it like that. Yeah, I have 9 of these today. Like I might have 9 interviews today. So, yeah, you have got one chance,
I
often.
think being authentic. I mean, if you're authentic and you bring to the table the things that you love, the things that you enjoy, and
Yeah.
you can bring the alignment to what you enjoy and what you're good at to the role, then it becomes effortless. When you're going for an interview and you're not quite sure whether you want the job, and then you're trying to marry up your skills to the job, often the hiring manager can pick.
True. And it's also hard because you often have, people often have a lot of imposter syndrome, and I struggle with that myself as well. So I name it and I put it in the corner, like, shush, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Here's why you want me for the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point because you're quite right. We do talk a lot about imposter
Yeah.
syndrome, and you're making these claims, but can I really do it? I heard an interesting comment the other day that we're moving from the age of what did you study to what can you do,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that's a really important shift. So, is that something that you look for? Is rather than what did you study or what did you learn or what title did you have? It's what can you do?
I think so, yes, exactly. And I don't care if you've done something for 20 years and then you complain about, oh, kids nowadays, and I don't want to open a chat GPT or AI or Claude. I want to know is curiosity. If someone comes to me and says that, oh, I haven't done it, but I'm keen to get on it,
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to give them a chance because they're eager to learn. They're eager to evolve with the time. And I would any day give someone a job who hasn't done something but is eager to put in the hard work. And if they put in the hard work and they move ahead with the time, they'll do wonders.
Mhm.
But someone who is stuck in that 20 years gut and say, no, I'm not going to do this. This is my way of doing it. it's not going to be beneficial for the business because businesses have evolved, companies have evolved, and they've accepted the technology.
I think, the number of times that I'm in a job where the original position description is no longer, nothing to do with what I'm currently doing. We've all been through that.
Yeah.
That's the reality of what's happening in the workforce a lot. So that's that piece around having the curiosity, having the growth mindset, being able to adapt to change, being resilient to change is going to be really helpful.
Okay. Well, one of the other areas that I'm interested, we see it now, LinkedIn, other networks. Is there still value in that sort of cultivating professional relationships? And how do we do it when work is hybrid, remote? I mean, this is lovely to be face to face here today with you.
Yeah.
But if we were on Teams or Zoom, how do you still cultivate those professional relationships? And is that still as important?
I think I'm seeing a change where people now, on LinkedIn in particular, are now starting to find phone numbers and going back to calling people. Because I think there is so much noise, there's so much AI noise, particularly on LinkedIn. You don't know if it's a real person, you don't know if it's been sent automatically through a bot. And I think people, as we talked about before, want authentic relationships. And so we're seeing a trend of people now actually getting back on the phone and calling people rather than LinkedIn messaging them. If they really want to speak to that person, they're going to pick up the phone. And that's something that probably this new generation of graduates have really grown up, that you just text or you send a message. So they may not be as comfortable about picking up the phone. So that's probably a soft skill that I would look at as something going to be particularly important.
Yeah, actually, that interpersonal communication.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Just simply picking up the phone rather than a message or an email. Yeah, I think it's pivotal.
Yeah. Like to
And I think so. Networking, if you don't make networking like networking, it is pretty easy. Simple as it is. And I know a lot of people on LinkedIn, they'll send a message, "Hello," and can we catch up, or can I make a call or something like that. When I started my supermarket journey, I found a mentor through LinkedIn, and we spoke once on LinkedIn, and since then we've always met face to face. And face to face is much more different than just talking via email or through LinkedIn. And I still believe networking is very, very important. Unfortunately, if you are an introvert, you might have to change. But it's highly, highly important in today's world, I'd say.
I'm just going to pick up on your bit about networking that doesn't feel like networking. I really love that, because you do get people who, you can clearly see that they're trying to network with you versus the idea of, so my approach is, what can I give you?
Yeah.
So what can I bring to the table that is useful for you or whatever? In the one of the things that I have done recently is start a community of practice for the whole of VicGov around AI, because people were looking for answers and there wasn't anywhere for them to go. And to be honest, I wanted to hear what other departments were working on as well. So it was that idea of like, what can I give back to the community? And it's been amazing. Like, it's an amazing group of people who are so generous with their time and with their ideas. And I love that, because that's that real positive networking, not networking for the sake of networking.
I'm just curious, do you meet in person or do you meet online?
So I thought it was going to be 80 people. 80 of my closest nerd friends who were interested in AI. But of course, it is an amazing area. And so we have 2,000 people that are now part of that community. So logistically, we're online.
Yeah.
And we run monthly sessions. 250 people turn up every month and try to make it as informal as possible. But there's a logistics challenge with that as well. But it really came from that place of, right, how do we all give back? And we've got an amazing steering committee who, again, are all that same kind of idea of how do we help other people understand this world?
No, and I really like that, because I'm in a few communities of practice, but they're global. And so we meet online, but we meet but we still meet at the same time, and we have regular monthly meetings, and it's and I know it's funny that face to face, sometimes it still feels face to face if you know these people,
Yeah.
even though you're online. And I just wondered, is that in person connection, can that still be done digitally, or do we, once you have a relationship, can you sort of effectively network online with other people?
I think I've found that you can definitely do it online. There's, you have to work at it.
Yeah.
It takes effort. And, setting up particular things, whether it's coffee catch-ups, or there's lots of different mechanisms that you can use that will help with that, creating that real connection online. I know it's really hard for people who have come into workplaces who may not have had that longevity of connection with their workplace. And I do feel sometimes for young people who are new to a workplace and they're seeing someone once a week kind of thing. So it can be a challenge, but I think it's also really possible as well. And I've seen a lot of people really succeed with it.
I think that if it's logistically and financially viable, then it's basically face to face, makes a lot of difference. I've got a seminar or a networking event in Croatia, which is a 1-day event. But for me, traveling to Croatia for a 1-day networking event, it doesn't make sense. If I might as well make a holiday out of it, but not at this point. But when I met my mentor for the first time and our face to face, we were at a restaurant and we had this white paper tablecloth. He scribbled everywhere on the white tablecloth, or white paper. I still have that paper with me, and that makes a lot of difference. And maybe it's an emotional attachment, but the knowledge which was on that paper really helped me in my supermarket journey.
Yeah.
The power of mentor, that's the other thing I wish I'd known when I was in my early 20s. They are incredible, whether they're informal mentors or formal ones. The things that I have learnt from my mentors, and the things that my mentees, I think that's the right word, have taught me as well is as amazing. I wish I'd known that earlier.
I actually, so I think there was a program, I think it might have even been Deakin running it, which was a reverse mentor program. And so it had older sort of senior people who were perhaps struggling with some of the technology or that, and actually pairing them up with a younger person to help them with that digital literacy, digital fluency. And I thought that's a very good point. It's a two-way relationship when you have a mentor. Yeah. So I do want to ask a very practical question, and I think, Mel, you might be the right person to answer this. We talk about this idea of we accrue skills across life, across experiences, but if you're sitting down and you're young and you think, how do you take an audit of those transferable skills? How do you say, right, this is what my degree is, this is my working experience, but what are the skills that are hidden or embedded within it? What advice would you give to a young person?
Well, often I sit with graduates and I go through their resume that they present, and there's lots of gaps in there. And I talk to them about, what skills did you learn when you were at McDonald's? What were the soft skills? Oh, I was a team leader and I used to manage this, and I was involved in performance counselling, and I found I learned how to have difficult conversations, and I had to manage up. I went to a conference where I had to be working with senior people that I hadn't worked before. So it requires spending time and helping someone look at all the things that they learned. Like I would talk to them about, well, what were you in sport? They would be a team manager in their tennis club, and what are those skills? So it's looking at the gap of all of the things they've been doing, and then how do they get them down on paper, and how do they then make them relevant to the job? So maybe it's not as simple as we suggest. It does take time to think about, what are the skills that I have? What are the skills looking for in the role? And how can I translate them? And so that is a skill that is required. So this career architect, that seems to be a new job, maybe someone that you may need to talk to. Yeah.
And I think that's a very good insight, is that even just what you were saying there, we we seem to assume that because someone can do something,
Yeah.
that they'll know how to describe it and they'll
Yes.
know how to talk about it.
Yes.
But as you quite rightly said, when you start asking them, there's lots of gaps.
Yes.
So, Nicole, how would you suggest to somebody to say, how do you uncover those gaps? What should they be doing when they write a resume or think about how they're presenting themselves?
I think so. You got to look at your current skill sets and see what the job is asking for, and you got to step out of a little bit of your comfort zone and sort of advance those skill sets or learn more on those skill sets. It's not like you're on a Friday you are working in operations, and then on Monday you have a little tube light or say, oh, I want to be a crypto trader or a crypto educator. It's like a vast difference. Although in my case, it was something like that, from accounting and finance to get into business and health and industry and sexual health and wellness space. But from a skills perspective, you got to see what you have, what you can get, and what will help you in the future. And at the moment, people need to learn the AI skill sets. It's in every phase. Be it for us, we use it in marketing, we use it in social media, we use it in presentations. So those are the skill sets which will elevate your career, into a sort of a different zone, and which will help you in the future.
So I'll come back to what you were saying before then about that curiosity and find a nerdy thing to do. Would that, which I absolutely love, I have it in a nerd. Would you recommend that people should be really, even if it's not part of their job, playing with AI, experimenting with it?
Always. But just because I think it's fun.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm a little biased, but I think it's interesting and fun, and there are so many little small bits of your life that it might be interesting and fun for, versus being concerned or scared about it. We should absolutely be concerned and worried about ethics and sustainability and all of those good things. But go and play with it and find something that's interesting. Find something that interests you. I've got friends that use it to help them sort out their D&D world that they're creating, so Dungeons and Dragons for role playing. Like, you don't have to be using it for work, but I think it's interesting to see how it works. My favourite definition of AI is an unfortunate choice of words in the 1950s. It's nothing to do with human intelligence. It's computational statistics. So if you have some idea of how it works, it's better. You've got a better idea of what it's going to be good at versus what it's going to be bad at. So, advanced technology often looks like magic, and understanding what it can do, how it does it, will help you understand what it can do well and what you shouldn't be using it for, which is just as important.
Yeah. Okay.
I think AI skills in the future will be just like a soft skill. You will need to know how to use productivity tools, and you need to probably use them at such a high level, so that you will be competitive in the marketplace. I think I'm seeing it more and more. And look, in my function now, I probably use AI 100% of Claude all day. I use that. Now, if you had told me 5 years ago, I would have enjoyed watching Python and understanding tech words. Everyone would have laughed, but it's absolutely fundamental now to my career. And so I would suggest graduates, AI would be considered a skill that they will need as an entry level. They would need to be not just competent, but I would suggest highly competent. It would, yeah.
I mean, in my day, we came out, we had to be able to type. We had to be able to use Word, and we had to be able to type.
Yeah.
So it's probably a similar kind of thing.
Yeah.
I
agree.
I'm going to go back to the mentor thing before. We were talking about how you identify the skills and things. I've had very good mentors on the way through that helped me to create that narrative, to turn the stuff that I had done into the narrative for a job. That's been really helpful.
I must say one thing, I experiment a lot with AI, and because I work in skills-based hiring and recognition, I've asked AI a few times, I've given it my resume, and I've asked it to go and find skills taxonomies and match up to that, and actually used AI as a mentor, and it's actually quite interesting what AI will see in your profile that you yourself don't see. And I've rewritten it a few times based on AI
right.
feedback.
Yeah.
As we said previously, that if you don't do AI, if you don't learn AI now, it's just like learning internet in the 2000s.
Yeah.
If people haven't learned that internet in 2000, they'll be printing their itineraries and emails now. So you got to embrace that technology now. And when you talk about soft skills, I feel like watching Netflix is a pretty cool soft skill, because you can have 100 on your list, but have you decided what you want to watch? Because I've sometimes spent half an hour putting shows on my list, but not being decisive enough.
Oh, so it's a decision-making skill.
That's right,
See?
decision
There you
making,
go.
exactly.
Decision, procrastination.
Yeah,
We used to talk about that information, or I think analysis paralysis.
Oh, yes.
Too much information. Is that becoming worse with AI or better?
Certainly is with Netflix.
So many choices, and then you finally decide one, and then you realize it's on Stan instead.
A challenge. Actually, one thing I have been doing with the candidates that might be useful, I've been showing them how to do SWOT analysis of their resumes. And
Oh,
That's
so
a good one.
Claude is absolutely awesome at telling you what your strengths are, where there's some weaknesses in your resume in relation to the job. So you put the job in there that you're applying for, so it can look at all the attributes and skills, then your resume, and then it comes back after it's on the SWOT analysis and helps and gives you advice about whether there's some skill shortages there, where your strengths lie and adapt and are relevant to the job.
Whether it's the right job for you or not.
Yeah, and whether you're going to enjoy it. I use it often, and it's proving to be a good tool.
and that could be a really interesting way to. We talk a lot about transferable skills and how we move across jobs. I
Yep.
know at one point people were saying accountants make very good cybersecurity experts because there's a
Right,
real
yes.
shared level
Yeah.
of skills there.
Mm.
So what I'm sort of hearing you suggest is that if you were looking at a field, you could actually look at jobs in that, put your own resume in, and then ask AI to help do an analysis of
Yes.
what could you carry forward.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a
Yeah.
slightly boring voice in the room and say, be aware of where you're putting your personal data. So put your personal data into AI tools that you know what they're doing with your personal data. Sorry, someone's got to.
No,
look
no,
at
and I
your
think,
resume.
and I think
Yes,
that's
yeah.
a very, very
Yeah.
good point, because there are tools where it is very clear that it is going to use whatever you put in
Yeah.
and put it back into its own learning.
Yeah.
And then there are other tools where you can have privacy settings
That's
and so forth.
And
So
we're Bill
yeah.
Pro users in terms of paid
Yeah.
service.
So
So we're talking
just-
about paid services rather than
Yeah.
the free ChatGPT.
Exactly. So just
Fraud.
just being aware of where your
Yeah.
personal data is going, and in your CV, there's
Yeah.
a reasonable amount of personal data in there, so you've got to make a call.
Yeah.
And that's a very good point. If people are using it for their work or things,
Yeah.
be careful what you're putting in there and where it's
Yeah, that's
heading.
true.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that I think is interesting is that, we've been talking about careers changing and careers moving. Are there any tips or advice you could give for how do we do that little bit of crystal gazing and say, I think this is going to be going? I remember when blockchain was the talk of the world and everybody wanted a blockchain solution, and now we're moving into other things, or everyone was going to be a cryptocurrency expert, and now it's sort of like almost the end of it. How do you start to, or how do you say, this I think has legs, or is that just a roll of the dice? Anyone like to
Oh.
venture?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like this year I've seen so many things that AI is now so advanced that now even I think, wow, would I give anyone advice at the moment about next steps and whether I see the future? I think that interpersonal skills are going to be super important. The soft
Yeah.
skills will be super important. Technical AI skills will be important. And do I know what the roles will be in the next 10 years? I absolutely have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very much those human
Yep.
skills.
Yeah, because AI won't be able to take those skills in terms of that human element. So you can't compete from an accounting perspective or a legal perspective or doing HR, compliance and policy and all of those things. You'll never beat AI anymore. I can see it even today. but the interpersonal skills and the ability when someone's having a difficult day and to have difficult discussions. And so all of those skills, you need to hone on those skills because those are the things that won't disappear. But as for the jobs, I don't know what the jobs will be. I don't think they've been invented yet.
It's so complex. I mean, there's a lot of futurists out there having a stab at it. That they spend their whole lives, like that's what they do, is looking at it, and it's still complex. So 100% agree with all of that. I think we were all talking earlier about the importance of critical thinking as well. So people who are able to use the tools, who have the soft skills, and who have that really strong critical thinking, are going to, I think, are going to do well. But it's really hard for us to predict. There's a famous one around radiologists in 2016. They said, stop training radiologists. Computers are going to do it better. And radiology became a primary healthcare tool, and now there's a worldwide shortage of radiologists because of it's become a primary tool rather than a secondary tool. So it's really hard for us, for anyone to predict where roles are going to go. And we are seeing also a little bit of a shift back to some things, where we've gone from fully online to actually, no, we want to have some of those in-person events again so that, it's a lot of shifting sand.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we are coming towards the end, and I'm seeing we've got a couple of questions coming in. And we've got one question here that I think is really interesting. It's from saying that found that the formative experiences that we've been speaking about aren't really valued by interviewers. So how can you retextualize those experiences to be more attractive?
Really good question. I think sometimes it comes back to that narrative as well. So you're presenting that bit around why you are the right person for the job. So how you meet the thing they're looking for.
And is it the right job for you? I mean, there is a generation that, you can now send off 500 applicants to jobs. And as a recruiter, I've been witness to, you ring a candidate and they won't know what job you're ringing about. And so I think it's actually now about applying for roles that you really want, that you authentically feel like you've got those right skills for. And then you're able to, I believe, portray the skill set that's relevant to the job if you understand and only apply for the jobs that you think that are relevant to you.
Yeah, I think so. Like in today's economic climate, everyone was going to apply for every job possible.
Yeah.
It's basically what they think they can do.
Yeah.
But deep down in your heart, you got to see exactly what you really would love to do and what skill sets you have and what you can bring to the table. Because at the end of the day, companies will look at from a perspective, okay, great, we've hired you, but you got a probationary period, and then again, we'll have to let it go because it hasn't worked out. And both the parties have just wasted their time and effort in that. So when people are applying for roles, exactly apply for a role where you can really storytell yourself, you can sell yourself, and exactly you are
and it feels more authentic because then when you're telling your story, those skills are naturally coming out because it's your story. Totally. And I think that's important.
And that bit around the human connection piece as well and networking and how does that work? I think certainly a lot of my roles have come through who I've worked with in the past or knowing someone in the organisation or applying for jobs where there's some kind of connection. The other thing that's worked really well for me is around if I'm, if I'm not working at the time, I go and do short-term contracts because it's giving me skills. I don't know if how much that's still around in the market. And then finally, it's I don't have a job, I'll go and volunteer somewhere. Two things happen. One, you're creating more human connections, so you're more likely to have opportunities come. And two, Murphy's Law kicks in. As soon as you organise to go and start the volunteer job, someone will offer you a job.
Yep. So I agree.
This actually segues beautifully into the next question. It's for people making a significant career pivot, so a different role or a different industry. What's the most effective way to build visibility or credibility so your application actually gets noticed? So you're not exactly the right fit for the job, but how do you make your application stand out and sound credible?
So weirdly, and this seems to be quite weird with the unusual for a younger generation. I ring the person if there is a number or some way of
Yeah.
speaking to the hiring manager. I ring them before the job application closes.
And that's a
Yeah,
really, really
it's very
interesting point, because
important.
I've actually seen a reluctance in young people. As you
Yeah.
said before, they want to text, they want to email,
Yeah.
but often there is, if you would like to know more information, please ring
Yeah.
this number.
Yeah, it's your ability to build rapport quickly,
Yeah.
and if you can do that on the phone, and then when they see your resume, and it might be a bit different, but, the world of applicant tracking, sometimes it's a challenge now that,
That's changed.
applicant tracking deals with that resume. It shoots it either to the left, yes, for a short list, or no to the right. So sometimes they don't. But with the world of LinkedIn, you can track someone down, like 6 degrees of separation. I'm sure you're 1 degree away from knowing someone who knows someone that can help you with an intro, because I think that's really important if you're pivoting. Yep.
Hmm. So this is an interesting, because as we've been talking, we've been talking about that ability to change, that ambiguity. But this question is about, many people want a predictable, stable career path. Not everyone is comfortable in that. Are we accidentally creating an anxiety-driven workforce by telling them they constantly need to reinvent themselves and change? And
I mean, it's bias in the room here. We are 3 people who have pivoted,
yes,
and are comfortable with the pivot. So there is a little bit of bias, that bias in the room as well. Sorry, Nicola, you go.
No. I think you're right. Like, we are all have changed, in a way or another. But I think so. You need to you need to come out of a bit of your comfort zone. Like, when I started my career, it was in accounting, and then I just moved to a little bit of business analytics. I didn't move from accounting straight to being, a radiologist, say, for example, case. It's not like, you are, one day you are an operations person, the second day you want to be, say, totally different. That's totally, will be a total disconnect. So you got to see, you just got to step a bit out of your comfort zone and get those skill sets, which will help you elevate. And it just, it's not like, you're going from east to west, you have to go slowly from
No, that
east
is the challenge. So
and
often I suggest, if someone, they might be in the medical industry, but they want to do something else, but I suggest, we'll go from working in HR in the medical industry, and maybe then your dream job is marketing, but stick to the industry so you've got some skills, and then you could go into a more junior role because you know the industry, and then eventually you pivot into marketing full time in a role that's in a completely different industry. So sometimes it's about taking steps that are little steps, that rather than the giant leap.
So it's probably worth reminding people that we're biased, but we're also talking about careers that have spanned many years.
Yes,
So this
yes,
is not
that's right.
something that happens in a week, in a month.
exactly.
No,
Yeah.
These have happened gradually.
Yeah.
And so if someone is starting out, it's not like they need to look for a major change within the first couple of years, but it's having that idea of, how do I collect my skills? How do I collect my story? How do I start to bring that together?
I heard of something the other day and I wished I'd done this. It was literally, they had a spreadsheet of what they had, like, when they were in jobs, what they had done, and some of the achievements and some of the, good things that they'd done in the role over the time. Because I can't remember what I did last week, let alone.
That is a
Oh,
really, really
that's a great
beautiful
tool.
suggestion. Every time you have a job, or in effect, you're almost journaling then. You're journaling your story
Your
of what you
winnings.
can do.
And you could put it, you could talk to Claude, and you could tell them about some of the projects that you enjoyed throughout your whole career, because you'll remember those. They will put it in a table. It will be up there in 30 seconds, done. So we'll be able to do it.
On that note, I think that's a wonderful takeaway, that idea of journaling. But does anyone else have a final takeaway they'd like to offer? Because we're about to come to the end.
Curiosity and kindness, it's really powerful.
Lovely.
Yes, and being comfortable and being a little bit uncomfortable with change.
I think emotional intelligence, curiosity, adapt, or you just phase out.
Yeah. So it's that keep learning. Also, thank you very much, Jane, Mel, Nicole. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your insight, sharing your experience. I know there were some other questions, but unfortunately we didn't get a chance to do all of them. But please, we'd love to have people join us tomorrow at the same time for the next Level Up session. The next conversation is about navigating work and... the next session is about AI at work, automate or augment. So thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to be with you all today.